car that takes you anywhere you want to go. The Model T. Strong, sturdy, with a will of its own.
What is it about Mustang that makes it happen? Maybe it's the new styling for 68, or options like a new 302 V8 and bold, racy hood stripes. Or maybe it's just the original idea, the better idea called Mustang.
Mustang sets you free.
Ford Ranger, a street machine that isn't confined to the street. Ford Ranger, the best-selling compact truck.
Cars have been seen as the vehicles of freedom in America since Henry Ford started cranking out Model Ts. From the advertisements drilling the image into people's brains, and the expansion of the highway system, legendary cars such as the veritable boats they drove in the 50s, the pony cars in the 60s and 70s, and the adventurous Jeeps and modern sports cars have fueled and looked to tap into the national psyche. This has spread around the world in many different ways, with the jeepneys of the Philippines, the tour buses of Iceland, the classic cars of Cuba, and many more showing the spread of American companies and the ideals that come with them. And, of course, there are unlimited ways to trick out cars and envision the future, both good and, well, weird. But, as the trend of lower vehicle ownership, ride-sharing, autonomous cars, and a ton of other factors change the automotive landscape, this mantra of cars being freedom is starting to fade. To keep this image going for yet a little while longer, and to practice my storytelling and editing, but mostly to keep the dream alive, I want to tell you all the story of my first, and so far only, car, Jenny. So, unlike what seemed like most teenagers in America, I didn't get my driver's license until the end of high school, and I didn't get my car until after college because, well, cars are expensive and insurance is also very expensive, especially in Michigan. After a summer of service in Detroit, it was time to move out to Seattle to start my job full-time, and that brought up two options: flying out with a limited amount of crap, or getting a car and driving out to Seattle. On a limited budget and looking for some adventure before starting my full-time job, I convinced my college roommate Franco to drive to Seattle with me and started looking for a car. I wanted something that I could enjoy and that would last me for a while, but instead I found a red 2005 Ford Focus ST. ST part is especially important. Well, not really, but it was within my budget, and it's cheap and easy to do repairs for, and it actually doesn't have bad gas mileage, and it's a manual transmission, which I enjoyed driving it, although I've found out since moving to Seattle that that's not always the easiest to drive around in. I picked it up after a test drive where my friend described it as chintzy, and drove it back to Ann Arbor for less than a week. Then Franco showed up and I packed up all my crap into it, and we started driving west with pretty much no plan. In retrospect, I probably should have pushed my start date back, but I guess I wasn't really thinking that much. So I can't emphasize enough how great it was that Franco was up for doing this, especially since he didn't know how to drive stick. I kind of didn't want to do it myself, which usually means that I should just go for it. So I did. And he was crazy enough to agree to it, which I'm eternally thankful for. This is what we're all about here, just taking a crazy adventure because we could. Just going for it because we knew it would be awesome, even though it would kind of suck too. Now, you may be wondering, why is the car's name Jenny? Isn't it a bit weird to name your car? And we'll get to why its name is Jenny, and yes, it is a bit weird, but it's in character, so whatever. I didn't just name it for a random woman also, or, well, I guess I kind of did, but again, I'll get into that. And I've always thought a car's name should be discovered, and not just given to it. So not only is this a story of where Jenny came from, but also where the name itself comes from. Franco and I started heading west with the plan to be in Seattle within 5 days, and hit Chicago around 1 p.m. the day we left, because we left later than we meant to because I started packing the night before. Whatever. I was just moving across the country. We stopped for some deep dish pizza in Chicago, of course, which in my opinion is essentially lasagna with a crust, but I like lasagna and I'm 100% behind Giordano's. Anyways, Franco had his first manual driving lesson in the parking lot there. Then we started heading up to St. Paul, Minnesota to stay with some friends. We checked out some cool sites in the Twin Cities, but we left significantly later than we meant to because the Mall of America traffic was way worse than we expected it to be. So we made it to the Badlands after sunset, and we had to set up our tent in the dark, which was just phenomenal, of course. The next day we got some picturesque views, went off-roading for the first time in Jenny, which also just phenomenal. No, it was a terrible decision, but I've done it many times again, which is also just a terrible decision, but whatever. And we stopped at Wall Drug Store, which is kind of the weirdest tourist trap I've ever seen in my life, because it has people from all over the world working there, but it's in the middle of nowhere and there are a ton of signs leading up to it across South Dakota. So just super weird, and there was a big motorcycle meetup going on right by there. After that, we stopped by Mount Rushmore, which was honestly pretty underwhelming, then continued on through the plains to Bighorn National Forest, where we camped for the night after checking out this super taxidermied bar, which was pretty cool, but also weird, as in character with the rest of the trip. The next day, we drove through the Wind River Reservation, then up through Grand Teton National Park and Yellowstone, where we checked out a bunch of amazing sights, then had to go off-roading again to find a camping spot past midnight. The next day we packed up and hightailed it through the Rockies and then through the Cascades to make it into Seattle before the leasing office at my new apartment closed. And that was how my first great adventure with Jenny ended. There have been some good ones since then, and hopefully there will be many more down the road. As I said before, Car's name is Discovered, and this trip really helped to make me fall in love with my car and its quirks, and though I think Franco kind of hates it right now, we both agreed that Jenny was its name after finding ourselves at Jenny Lake in the Grand Tetons. This is one of the kind of sights I was talking about. The amazing kind of thing that you only really get to see after jumping in a car, driving for hours and hours over plains and mountains. It was and still is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. A pristine lake guarded by tall gray-blue peaks coming over these expansive plains. And it was a sight that truly made me sit back and think of how small I was in comparison to all of that. Something that has only really ever happened before when I've stared up at the night sky that's just been undisturbed by clouds or cities. This awe is what made us say, that's the name. It can't be anything else. This wouldn't have been possible without Jenny. I plan to go back someday, hopefully with Jenny, to spend more time in these mountains, to seek adventures and sweeping sights in America's vast West. It truly was majestic. I want to take a minute here to point out some things about road tripping. It can be crazy, but I just really love how you can go unplanned with no real direction except for going west and drop in wherever seems interesting. That's one of the points I was getting at before. That freedom is real, especially in America, where you can just drive over vast tracts of land for hours and hours, where you're racing against the sun and just seeking and seeing glorious nature, which has really been preserved for us to visit, which I think was a phenomenal move on the government's part back in the day, and a car culture that encourages that. I've taken a ton of road trips in my life. Unfortunately, a good amount of them have been through Nebraska and Iowa, but also I've had the fortune of going on some road trips just around different parts of Iceland, across Ireland, through Spain, and through parts of the Philippines. But just this ability to do this, to just get in a car and go just go on awesome adventures, and the amazing changes of landscape and vistas and culture that you can see are breathtaking. So if you can, just try and do road trips as much as possible, and especially with friends who are able to dive into that and just engage in that really well. That relationship that you have is really key in a road trip. So the whole point of this was just to talk about my car, why I love her, and why I think that cars are a great tool for adventure. Not the only tool, of course, and definitely don't always rely on them. And they're useful for more than just going on adventures. But I think that people have had it right to see cars as freedom. Sometimes I'll find myself driving back from some random thing and then just deciding to turn down a random road or explore a random part of the city that I haven't seen before. While cars are obviously able to do a lot more than that, I try to use it as a way to explore when I can, to make things more convenient and just to get to know my city better. And hopefully I'll be able to take a lot more road trips with it in the future. I'm sad to see the association of cars and freedom go away, but I'm also excited to see how people go about exploring in the future. So thanks for listening to my little spiel. I hope that you're able to find some joy in your commute whenever we get a commute back, whether it's by car, bus, train, or walking or bike or whatever, and just looking for little adventures in that commute and seeing what it can offer you.
Forever of the great feat we just did. We drove through Wyoming. Yeah, we made it very, very close to being completely out of gas. A very bad call, completely my fault. I wanted to cut it close, and it got cut a lot closer than I thought because of the up mountain climbs, which really killed our gas mileage. But we made it. We're here. We didn't die. So, praise the Lord.